Welcome to Speech from the Throne. Today we have a special guest star, Bethany Drader, the former co-chair of the Women's Commission of the New Democratic Party for Canada. And, of course, following the latest news last week of a socialist takeover, as told by the Conservative Party, we thought who better to break it down with us, discussing not only the future of that party, but the future of the progressive movement in Canada as a whole. So, Bethany Drader, nice to have you on. You can give yourself a bit more of your own bio if you wish, and then we'll also start with some discussion of what you think this latest news means for you, and we'll move the discussion from there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. Like you said, I'm Bethany. I met these two guys at Carleton when we were in undergrad, and did some model parliament together and stuff, which was fun. Mm-hmm. I recently finished my master's at Carleton a couple months ago in political science, focusing in Canadian politics.
Right on.
And I also work for the Federal Public Service now, so yeah.
One of us.
Just like all three of us.
That's awesome. Well, we got a few questions, quite a few questions for you. I will let Jacob lead off here, but we just kind of want to figure out your history with the party. So, Jacob, take it away.
Liam and I and you, we've all worked for our parties in various fashions, but neither Liam or I have ever had the national spotlight in the same way that you have, Bethany. And for your 15 minutes of fame, you became famous, or maybe I shouldn't say famous, but certainly when all the eyes of the nation were on you, you delivered a very interesting report when you were co-chair of the Women's Commission, which we'd like to sort of unpack that and unpack your general experience working for the federal party. So, in particular, in this report, you seemed that there was funds had gone missing without a proper paper trail. And there was one line in particular, failures to facilitate our work erodes our trust, diminishes the potential of the NDP to reach an important block of voters and volunteers, and we sincerely hope that going forward the Women's Council will be able to function as it's meant under our Constitution. So I'd like to get your story of leading up to the report and what led to you and your co-chair delivering that report, why you felt it was necessary and to deliver this. This is like at the 2021 convention you delivered this. All the party is gathered. Why did you feel it was necessary to deliver that, and what was your experience leading up to that, and what lessons did you learn in that role?
Wow, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll start at the beginning. So I was on Women's Council originally as the youth rep through my position on the federal youth wing as well. So it was kind of started off like that. So I spent probably 5 years in total on the council. I then was elected as treasurer secretary, and then eventually as co-chair when we had one of our co-chairs step down. So I was actually a co-chair for longer than most people end up being a co-chair, because usually we have our conventions every 2 years. But for a number of reasons, it got pushed back. So it was actually like a 3-year term. And we had one election.
He's actually writing down your social insurance number right now, Bethany.
But it was mostly the concern over the 2019 election. And I was co-chair with Dirk Proud at the time. And we had, basically the whole point of the Women's Commission is to raise money to fund, non-men identifying candidates, essentially. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously, as you mentioned, that's something that, New Democrats are supposed to believe in fundamentally, and it's actually the longest standing women's council in any political party in Canada. So lots of history. We have a fund. It's formerly the Agnes MacPhail Fund. We changed the name to the Women's Council Fund. And by the 2019 election, we had almost 100 grand in the bank. And so at the time, Melissa Bruno was the executive director of the party, and us as the Women's Commission met with her and sort of laid down our set of guidelines for the fund, which had never actually been set out before by the Women's Council. It had been sort of, mainly handled by the Central Party and the treasurer. So we laid out our wants. We wanted it to go to candidates in ridings that were very low resourced, or people who have intersecting identities, people in rural areas, and the party wanted the money to go to the incumbents because at that point the NDP was very concerned about keeping the seats that it had. So that was their side of the negotiation, and we said, okay, we'll set aside 40% of the money for incumbents, but we, want the rest of the money to go to the other candidates who aren't incumbents. So that was essentially agreed upon between us and the executive director, and we set up sort of a way for the candidates to apply. We had a Google form where they could put where they're running, if they need special money for childcare, or all a bunch of different things that were accounted for, and it basically sent that all off to the party and was like, okay, well, we've done our work, now it's sort of up to you guys, because we weren't the ones who were going to be vetting and actually giving the money to the candidates. So we sort of just let it go to the universe, and we're like, okay, so the election's happening now, and actually Durka was a candidate in London North Centre for the NDP, so she was very busy herself with her own really great campaign. And yeah, we were all just busy, on our separate things. At the time, I did sit this election out. I didn't work on any campaigns. I think I did do a little bit of phone banking centrally, but it was mainly my biggest role that I was dedicating my time to was the Women's Council at the time.
So are you saying, and I don't want to get you in any trouble in saying this, but are you saying that you and your co-chair, you selected a group of women candidates for the party to fund, and then the party chose to basically not fund those candidates that you had selected, and that money went elsewhere? And in the report you say that it was completely drained without a paper trail, so it didn't even tell you where that money had gone.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's I wish it was what you had said. It, like, we didn't even know who had reached out to the party to apply for it. We had been getting women who would be messaging us on the Facebook page being like, hey, so I sent an email to the Central Party asking how to apply for this fund that's, publicized as this is the Women's Fund for the NDP, and they said, oh, there's no more money, or there's no opportunity for you to apply, essentially. So they were turning people away without even, taking their applications. And we asked repeatedly for any sort of correspondence or list of candidates who had applied and who had gotten money from the fund directly, and we were basically told no. Either they didn't have it or they just refused to give it to us. What I do think happened was basically that money was viewed as Central's money to spend however they wanted to spend it, and they did. And they even up till the convention that you mentioned, after the 2019 election, they couldn't tell us how much they took from our fund, what was left in the fund. There was a long period of time where our donation link on the website was broken. So not only had they completely drained the fund, that we were not able to replenish it with anything. It was a number of issues with the fund, for sure.
just to follow up on your sort of line of questioning, or to continue that thread, because you were digging at some good stuff. I think, I wonder. I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, it's a party that has, quite publicly been struggling financially for some years. Now, Bethany, I'm curious as to whether you think that it's a symptom of that, or whether it's a symptom of certain people or certain teams in the center spending the money the way they want because they're the center and you're not in their priorities. Is it a mix, or what do you think about that?
Well, the official line from them was that, like you said, that it's the most money they'd ever spent on an election. They needed the money. It was extremely important for them to have it. They also argued that they ended up spending over $100,000 on female candidates anyway, so it didn't matter that our fund was, basically drained, which was quite interesting as far as excuses go. But yeah, I do think it's been a big issue for a long time in the NDP, with keeping people around who clearly have proven to not bring success to the party. And
Right.
that's a very common criticism of the party.
Is that a criticism you share? Like, in particular, if you think of people like Andrea Horvath or other leaders, not that obviously that's a provincial figure, but do you think that the NDP is too forgiving to some of its leaders or people working in the leadership office, and it might be time for clearing house?
Yeah, and I think that there's also been an issue of the federal party, and maybe to a lesser extent the Ontario NDP, with actually cultivating young volunteers and activists and actually using them to their potential. Like, we're the only party that doesn't have some sort of internship program on the Hill where you can train the next generation of staffers, so we don't have that, and our activists burn out very quickly because they get absolutely no support from the party. And when you do see behind the curtain and you end up on the youth executive or the women's council, you really do see the ugliness behind it, and how undemocratic it can really get.
Now, as far as you know, has that been going on for quite some time? Is that a post-Leighton phenomenon? Has it been like this
Yeah,
recently only?
I would say it is a post-Leighton sort of thing, because before then it was a different party, right? Like, the party really did change when Jack came around. So, and obviously I wasn't really around before then anyway, because I joined the party when I was 14 in 2011 or something like that. So
It's quite a long time.
I'm interested in when you did set up the guideline to find these, female or you said non-male identified candidates. Like, a lot of the literature I've read regarding women candidates is that parties often will they'll put their woman candidates in a riding where they know that it's almost certain to lose. That it's a phenomenon where they want to have a good number of female candidates, but they couldn't really care less if they win. It's just about a source, and that they often believing probably wrongly that women are less likely to be elected, they'll give women less support. And it seems to me with a strategy like that, you're probably trying to combat this.
Exactly.
Is there any other ways or strategies that you've developed or thought about when you were working inside the party apparatus you think could change this outcome?
That's a good question. I would say that the party needs to allow the local riding associations to do their job and conduct thorough candidate searches, and to be active in their communities, especially in racialized communities and other underprivileged communities. and for the party to allow the ridings to elect who they would like to elect, and to not be disqualifying people for, for instance, tweeting something about Palestine. People in Palestine deserving rights. That
Right.
disqualifies you in a lot of cases for running for the NDP federally, and when you do that, you're really cutting out a lot of people from potentially disadvantaged backgrounds that normally wouldn't have had access to the party, and now you're just disqualifying them off the bat. But I would say, as a solution, letting the Women's Council do their job would really help, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And what you were saying there about the what I was starting to say about Tom Mulcair there was that I think he was the one to start that sort of more aggressive tilt towards maybe what some people would call a quote unquote neutral stance on Israel Palestine, but really it leans Israel. And Tom Mulcair, I think, if I recall correctly, was the first kind of NDP leader to say, okay, if you're gonna say Palestinian rights matter or whatever, like you can't, which I think is a mistake, but it seems like it started with him, and it's kind of just been a holdover of the party culture. I'm sure you could speak to whether that's true or not.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And yeah, I don't know. It's certainly not a unique problem to the NDP. I mean, you see all the time parties overstepping their, constitutional structure.
Would you say empowering certain communities to elect their own voices, is there like a particular set of policies that you think could engage disadvantaged communities, or a certain type of leadership? Like, I think in the way that Jagmeet Singh was sold to us as being that guy that could activate the other communities that we haven't brought into politics. Have you seen evidence of that? Or and if so, how is it possible, do you think, for the NDP to build on that sort of success?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things that Jagmeet has done for the party, I think, is bringing in all those different people that were previously never interested in politics or really saw themselves represented. Every time I go to an event, I'm always, post Jagmeet being elected, I'm always like so excited to see how diverse it's gotten. And yeah, I think more of that is what we need. So,
Right on. I think that's the thing that I think that's the difference maker between the NDP and the Liberals. And the Liberals historically, since I would say Jean Chrétien's Little Red Book, they called it, which was quite a left wing, especially for the time, quite left wing for the Liberals at the time. And then he just campaigned he governed way to the right of it, like way to the right of it. And that sort of continued on through Justin Trudeau, who has definitely taken the Liberals a little bit more to the left. But some people, like, I was laughing, Bethany, the other day because Jacob and I were recording something else earlier. And I was saying I was reading the Hill Times, and there are these anonymous Liberal MPs complaining to the paper about how ultra-left the Liberals had gone. I was like, oh my God. The ultra-left commie nightmare is here. Like it just gave off those vibes. But the reality is, that's what marks the difference between the NDP and the Liberals. The Liberals they still have that blue Liberal contingent. They're quiet. They're kind of like the Red Tories and the Conservatives. They're quiet. They're small, but they're there. And they're worrying about the loss of the center. That the Liberals are going way too left for the center, which I think is hilarious. But it's just the market difference, and I think it became so politicized, the Israel-Palestine thing, especially post 9/11. Like Stephen Harper always had a hard line, sort of like pro-Israel, like staunchly kind of position, and Justin Trudeau continued elements of his foreign policy, which include our friendliness towards Ukrainians, but also that. He just continued that right through without changing that approach on Israel-Palestine, and it's poisoned the conversation a little bit. Like, I think it's people are either both sides it, or they're pro one side or pro the other side, and there's no nuance to it. It's become hyper partisanized. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. And I'm just curious as to what you think how, do you think politicians, it's one of those things that electorally nobody really worries about, or that politicians are worrying too much about? Um, do you think this is where the NDP should take a point of principle and kind of go, no, we're going to say Palestinian rights? Like, do you think that's something they need to stand up for, or is it good to be risk averse? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very hard fought battle in the party. Somebody who's been to a number of conventions and seeing the hoops that the members have to jump through to be able to get any sort of Palestine motion on the floor of convention. You know, it means showing up at 5 a.m. to the priority panels and, potentially having people physically intimidate you and things like that. It's not a very friendly exchange that happens at the conventions. It's always the
No.
most like contentious thing that comes up, and it comes up every time. But it's only because the activists fight for it.
Right.
The Central Party really tries to bury those at the bottom of the list. A lot of foreign policy actually doesn't ever really make it to convention floor. We deal a lot with domestic and social policy, but I think the foreign policy thing is very much overwhelmed by the Israel-Palestine debate, and we don't really touch on much else when it comes to foreign policy at our conventions.
Which is a shame, because there's such a void in that discussion. There's a place for the NDP in that discussion. And the line we've heard, whether you agree with it or not, is, well, we don't need to expand Canada's military, and we really shouldn't have much of a military at all. But it never goes beyond that, other than, as you were saying, the Israel-Palestine debate. And I think that's a missed opportunity personally. And I wonder, do you think that it would take a new leader to change that approach? Do you think that it's not a leader issue? Do you think it's endemic to the party? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a Jagmeet thing. I think it was an issue before he became leader. But he certainly has been complicit in the, silencing of that sort of talk, trying to keep everything on message and stuff like that, I know for a lot of people it is their reason they're in the party and the thing that that they're fighting for, but I don't think that is the case for the majority of Canadians, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we haven't been, pushing that policy or whatever. Yeah.
To go on a bit of a different tack, Bethany, you worked all for the federal party. You worked for the provincial party. I'm interested in getting what you think the difference is between maybe in Alberta, where the NDP is a serious contender for government. It seems very likely they might win the next election, versus federally, where they're struggling to get every single seat. Do you think that changes the way that the leaders and both those parties are communicating with the public, the positions that they're taking with the public, and the goals that they're setting? Like, do you think that Jagmeet would ever be willing to make a deal with Justin Trudeau like this if he thought that he was going to win the next election, for example? Or do you see that maybe there is no difference at all, and NDPs are just trying to get as much social policy through as they possibly can, no matter what? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that's a good question. I would say, being from Alberta and experiencing the Notley NDP government, and we had John Horgan next door, and there was a lot of headbutting even between the two premiers.
Yeah.
So, and then they want to get the federal party to take a side, on either side of the argument, and then people get angry that they're not taking a side, or they take the wrong side in their opinion. That's the problem you have when you have a provincial and federal sections, is that they do have their own policies. Like they generally are under the same political ideology, but you're going to find different policies at the Alberta NDP convention that you would see at the federal one, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's intentional, that the federal or the provincial NDP in Alberta is becoming essentially, it seems to me as an outside observer, is just basically filling the void of what an Alberta Liberal Party would have looked like if it existed. Do you think that they're intentionally doing that to win government, or is it just happens to be that those are the people that work for the party at the time? Like, is where's the pony and the cart at this stage? Are they taking more moderate stances to win government, or they just happen to be more moderate people that are working there?
That's a good question too. I have a unique view on this because I got involved back before Rachel was even leader, and we only had 4 MLAs. So I was on the party executive back then. And I will say that I would say that it wouldn't be too much to say that the Alberta NDP government may have been a little bit less progressive than a number of progressive people around the country and even in Alberta had wanted. But it is the case that the Alberta NDP has always supported oil and gas as an industry, and they realize that it's very important to the economy. And I really, really liked the energy platform the Alberta NDP won on in 2015. I think that made me definitely to the right. People would think I'm on the right of the party because of that stance that I had back then. My views on pipelines have definitely shifted over the last few years. But back then I did think that they were pretty good on with their energy policy.
So in 2015, the NDP was very clearly in contention for government. Now they seem to be trying to save every seat possible, and they're working on a new deal with the government to get some policies through. Do you think that the NDP has switched from a government ambition towards more of a policy-centric ambition, or are they still maintain that same goal of one day forming government?
Yeah, I think always the goal is to form government. We're always running to win. Always that might not be the case, but I think we saw, in the Orange Wave that the NDP has broad appeal across the country. But there always are going to be those members who really don't care about who's in power and are genuinely just interested in seeing their policies get passed. So this deal definitely is making them happy, that's for sure.
Well, I'm curious to dig into that whole deal. The socialist nightmare, as the Conservatives would have you believe. I think it's. I'm not worried about Jagmeet as much as I'm worried about Justin Trudeau trying to renege on certain aspects of the agreement. The classic liberal cop-out, right? So I'm not certain whether or not I trust him to see it through. If it does go all the way through a la BC almost, I guess Horgan broke that. Yeah. But if it can make it a few years and we can ensure the childcare rollout goes smoothly, if we can make meaningful progress on dental care, hopefully exactly as was laid out or possibly further, but at least exactly as it was laid out in the agreement. Though, if we can get those 2 things done, or 3 things I should say, because I'm going to add pharmacare, if that can get rolling in a meaningful way, I think that's a huge accomplishment. I do think it would take that agreement working for at least 3 years to have any hope of doing that, especially given that the Liberals seem to be slow on moving policy compared to their predecessors. Whether or not that's because of, I don't think it has anything to do with omnibus bills, because the Liberals aren't afraid of those. I think they're just kind of bad at getting things passed smoothly, or slower than the Conservatives anyway. So if all goes smoothly, a smooth sailing for 3 years, I think it could be really meaningful. But my question for you is, do you trust both of these guys, or even one of these guys, enough to think that it'll get fulfilled?
Yeah, well, I think it's the optimist in me, but I can't help but be optimistic about the opportunity that this presents. I think especially since the NDP is technically the fourth party in the House, to be in this sort of position is fantastic. There are people in the party on the other side of the argument who say, "Oh, we just showed him our hand and gave him all the power, and now we don't have any bargaining room for anything." But it's like you said, you don't always trust the Liberals, right? So I'm hopeful, but I'm not foolish. So that both leaders have said that they could pull out at any time, or it's not necessarily going to be around, like you said, until the next election is coming. But yeah, I think that it has a lot of potential, and I think it really reminds me of something that Jack Layton would have done, and I think it's kind of the first time that I felt like that in a while, that the party is doing something that reminds me of what it was like under Jack.
If the goal is still to achieve government, which did seem possible under Jack Layton, bring back to what you said, what is the narrative that the party has to sell with this confidence supply motion? What is how does this New Deal position the party going into what could potentially be an election a few years from now, so that it can actually win that election? Because we see in sometimes junior partners, this is not a coalition, but partners are propping up the government sometimes fall with that government as well. But we also have examples like Bob Rae, the NDP in Ontario, that they helped the Liberals and then ended up getting a majority government out of nowhere from it. Is it just a vain hope that they can sell this to the public, or is there actually a plan? Or maybe I should ask, what would your plan be if you were working for the party, so that we can sell this to the voters and get an NDP government out of this deal?
Well, first of all, I think that this deal isn't for the NDP to form the next government. I think that this deal is for them to make the best out of the situation that they're in right now, and to get as many of our policies passed as possible and help as many Canadians as possible. And that's really been what Jagmeet has been saying, since the 2019 election, is that the new elected New Democrats to bring forward progressive policies and to help Canadians. And that's what he's promised to do, and he's proven that he's doing that. So
I don't know, like, I think that's the existential debate that's happening right now, right? Is does the party want to be a movement, or does it want to be a serious contender? I think right now it's something of a movement more than a contender, and it's content with that. And I think that's completely okay, because that's where it's had the most impact in Canadian history. Tommy Douglas and Lester Pearson, that was one of the greatest moments in our history, one of the policies that we're most proud of, I think, and across partisan lines that everybody is proud of. And hopefully we can build on that. Hopefully this is a chance to build on that. I want to be an optimist too. I think I've gotten so cynical, so I'm trying not to let my own cynicism cloud my view too much. You got to have something to look forward to. And my God, if we could get those three things just out of the park, everything's good, then I think that's fantastic. That's a big win for the entire country.
Yeah, I'm also really hoping that the NDP can get that policy passed to cut the government's subsidies for fossil fuels and oil companies. I think that's something that's kind of flown under the radar of one of the priorities, and I think that's a really big one.
Do you think this confidence supply motion could solve what I think is becoming sort of a perennial issue in the NDP, where you guys have excellent policies, but in a sense you sort of have too many of them, that whenever you go to any election, you're throwing like 15 policies at people. No one really has a central message. Do you think if you go into an election with, we gave you pharmacare, we gave you dental care, you can actually have a platform you can run on?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the great things about what Jagmeet and the NDP caucus has gotten done, over the last 2.5 years now. I think it's very impressive that as an opposition, as the fourth party, that they've been able to accomplish what they have. And I think that now that there's an official agreement, we can really actually claim those. There's always people who argue, oh well, it was under a Liberal government, so it doesn't count if it was an NDP policy. But that's just partisanship for you. But yeah.
Well, I think that's classic partisan blinders, right? Like there's people in the Liberals who, I mean, they're becoming a little bit quieter these days, but Jacob and I at one time were quite partisan Liberals, as you probably recall, and I was personally quite partisan until SNC. Like that was finally the thing that just did it for me in being overtly partisan. Like definitely electoral reform hurt. Like I was upset about that. But you don't want to give up on the party, so you're like, okay, so you kind of ride it through, and I think that's why I'm more cynical than some. But there's some, they're quieter these days, that have the partisan blinders on, and their party can do no wrong, and the center can do no wrong, or they just toe the line because they're trying to rise up in the ranks. I think that's the case in every caucus, every party, and the sad part is it's getting to such a it's becoming so hyper partisan that it's begun to pollute the discourse. And it was something that Peter Mansbridge actually mentioned on his podcast today. I was listening today, and he had Bruce Anderson from Abacus Data on there. And Bruce was talking about this MP, Rachel Thomas from the Tories, who everybody's seen the clip of her reading her silly little speech about how, haha, I looked up dictator in the dictionary, and like, Trudeau fits. Some Canadians think Trudeau fits that. Some people are saying it. It's just like Bruce was saying, and I completely agree. It's like, where is the value? Like, okay, so somebody in your office or you thought it would be funny that you would say that. You knew you were going to get viral hits because everybody in your comment section was going, oh wow, great job, like you got him, you own the libs, and like, and sure, so she's blown up. We've all seen it. She's had her 15 minutes of fame. But when people look back on you as an MP, and she's been an MP since 2015, I'm pretty sure, formerly Rachel Thomas.
She was,
and when people look back on you, what did she get done for me? Oh yeah, she did that viral clip comparing our elected prime minister to a dictator. It's just absolutely insulting to me.
That's what the people of Lethbridge have really been doing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry to hear that. And with the Lethbridge police too, that's a whole other thing. Jeez. But all that to say that it's gotten to this level of partisanship where you can't even bring yourself to have the principles to say, no, like, I don't like Trudeau either. I really don't. I think he's bad for Alberta. I think he's bad for Lethbridge. He was elected. You can't say that he wasn't elected. To see you not only not standing up for that, but just gladly dealing out the snake oil is disgusting to me. And it's not just the Tories. The Liberals were hyper partisan during SNC. That was what culminated in me. I'm like, I can't listen to any of you guys anymore. And you're on my team, quote unquote. I can't even listen to you guys. And like, everybody has their kind of moment every now and again, the partisans in the party. And it's fine to support the causes that your party support. But like, are we really going to get to this? Like, I remember Melanie Joly was asked about the SNC-Lavalin affair, and she's like, well, politics is kind of like a team sport. And she's not wrong in that comparison, but she was also making that argument to say, like, that's how it is. Like, that's the game. And she's right. But it is sad that, like, does that not bother her? Does that not bother, I think it's a wider discussion that needs to be had that is just never properly had. What do you guys think about that? Both of you. What do you guys think? I'm curious.
Or maybe we should ask Bethany, have you had a similar, you said you sat out the last election. Have you had a similar experience, or was that commission report that you delivered in 2021 your SNC-Lavalin experience that stopped you from, turned you away from the partisanship?
That was certainly my mic drop moment. It was, I've done all that I can, and I can't do anymore. So I was on the youth executive provincially, and they've since had another election, so I'm officially not on any NDP boards or anything anymore. There was a lot of times where it could have been the mic drop moment, and I decided to stick with it and support the party and be a team player, like you were saying. But you know, after nearly a decade of it, it was too much. So you know, I made the decision to step away from that, and I'm glad that I did. It's not that I don't believe in the party, not that I won't vote for them, but they've gotten the max amount of emotional and physical labor they're going to get from me for now. So
It's completely understandable. I think we feel the same way about the Liberal Party right now. We've both said publicly our opinions on the Prime Minister, who has been duly elected, listeners. There was no coup. He's not a dictator. He doesn't have
No
the power to
communist
lay
takeover.
crimes.
No.
There's no communist takeover. You can vote him out in the next election. And we wish he would go too. We wish that maybe somebody else would step in and maybe reinvigorate the party, because all we wanted was, like, I would say we're ideologically quite close to what the 2015 campaign promised. And a lot of that was steamrolled. And I think we just need somebody to reinvigorate that, to turn down the temperature a little bit, not be so holier than thou about everything. And Nini agrees, you know, because she comes into frame because she must hear my voice somehow.
She definitely.
I think that's how.
Attracted to you.
But
sort of speaking
anyway,
about
go ahead, Jacob.
the future of the Liberal Party, pretty soon, some people are speculating that perhaps this deal is evidence of it. There's going to be a vacuum of leadership in the Liberal Party, and there's certainly elements, right-wing elements that are complaining the press that want to move the party towards the center. But it's also an opportunity for progressive voters to organize and keep the Liberals in elect-wing focus. And perhaps after a few years of working together, you know, it's not impossible to imagine a Jeremy Corbyn type being elected leadership and getting a maybe even a merger between these two parties and getting a Labour Party. Or a Labour-like party in Canada. Do you think that left-wing activists like you, I, and Liam should be, if Trudeau does step down, taking an advantage and maybe plotting for something like this to drive the Liberal Party with all its resources, with all its institutions, with the team player ethic? You know, if they had a Jeremy Corbyn type, they would actually support him potentially. They could get that guy in power. Should we be organizing to have that happen, or should we be putting our mental and emotional effort into like the NDP and hoping that it can get a few policies now and then?
well, I think that's funny because I'm pretty sure that's what Justin Trudeau tried to do.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yes.
so I don't know. I think I don't ever see the NDP merging with the Liberals. It's been a discussion forever, and I don't see it happening. It could be the case that the Liberals continue to push for progressive policies, whether they're progressive in practice or if they're just nice words is another thing.
Right.
They really like to do that. So I don't know, and I don't know. I don't see anybody waiting in the wings of the Liberal leadership like that. So
What if it's like Jagmeet Singh that ran for the leadership? Like, what if
that would be quite the scandal.
Like, what if it was what if it is an NDP person that like the same way you have like Jason Kenney running for the PCs and then merging the parties, like it's the outside force trying to take over.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm always for the Liberals being more left. That always makes me happy. It always makes my day. So I'm all for it. If that's something that's going to happen, I'm great for that. I really do think that Chrystia Freeland's going to be the next leader, but we'll see.
So you don't think that the parties should merge or will, like?
No.
Okay.
No.
Neither do I, Bethany.
The NDP is an essential fixture of our political landscape, in my opinion. I think that they, if they weren't there, the Liberals would not be progressive. You know, if it weren't for the NDP, they wouldn't be so interested in trying to appeal to the left and to try to take those votes. So I think that the NDP is important as an opposition party, but even better as a governing party.
I'm interested in what evidence you would point to suggest that, because there are other even countries in the Anglosphere where the two main right and left parties, the left wing party, even without a farther left alternative, is still willing to take very far left positions, like Labour in the UK. I mean, they under the Tony Blair, they definitely moved more in the liberal direction, but then I said, like, under Corbyn, they definitely moved leftward. Australia, their Labour Party can be pretty left-leaning. Mm-hmm. Of course, we definitely think a lot in terms of the Americans, and the Democrats like are hopelessly centrist or even right-wing sometimes. So you're saying that the NDP sort of forces the Liberals leftward, but wouldn't, if all those activists and politicians and money that's going towards the NDP, if they were in the Liberal Party actively battling out in the Liberal Party, wouldn't that like literally force the party to move leftwards rather than just an occasional electoral influence?
I don't know. I think that the party establishment is very strong in the Liberals, and it would be quite the effort to shift the culture internally of the party to bring it to the level of progressivism of the NDP. I think that would be quite the feat.
There'd have to be a purge for sure, but yeah. That's...
yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the internal workings of the Liberal Party, but yeah, I know the Labour Party is actually the NDP's sister party, mm-hmm. Which I found interesting because they do remind me a lot more of the Liberals here than they do of the NDP. So,
like, the only other situation I think where a purge would work of that nature would be, it's not something like where the Liberals in 2011, when you had them knocked down to 34, 35 seats or whatever it was. Justin Trudeau came in and sort of essentially rebuilt the party around him. I think unless you have a situation like that, it's going to be tough to have a purge, because, I mean, even under the old, more centrist Liberals, like pre-Trudeau or pre-Ignatieff even, it was there were quite a lot of knife fights behind the scenes, and that would boil out publicly at the time. The Liberals have been very disciplined about that because they know it hurt them quite a bit. But that people forget that their dirty laundry used to be regularly aired. And
in RCMP reports,
and the Gomery Commission kind of was the death note, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if we'll ever see a purge. I don't know if there's value in a merger anyway. Really, to me, under our first past the post system, it's already like unbalanced enough. I feel like if we reduce the options people have on the table, sometimes that's not the greatest thing or the healthiest thing. That's kind of where I'm at. Not that it provides even a greater degree of proportionality, because again, our system doesn't really allow for that, but it's just nice for people to have as many choices as they can under this crappy system until somebody finally works themselves up to changing it, whenever that may be. And what do you think about electoral reform, Bethany? Do you think that's something that the NDP will ever kind of push the feds to talk about again? Will the feds ever be pushed to talk about it again if they're a Liberal government? Or is this sort of a kicking a dead horse?
Yeah, well, I'm sure it was on the table discussion for the deal. Yeah, I think, as it was basically their platform in 2015, they went through all the hubbub of having, the commission and all of that, and the Minister of Electoral Reform, and then they decided it wasn't going to be good for them and decided not to do it. So there might be a time where they decide, oh, this might actually be good for us, so maybe we'll take a look at it. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think mixed member proportional representation would be my first choice, and I think it would be really good for the NDP.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what the Liberal consultation said too, and they didn't like the answer. So I think that was part of why they quashed it. They're like, we can't do this, and just they could, but they wouldn't. And par for the course. I think they're hardly as ambitious as they market themselves to be. But the saddest part is, and Jacob and I revisit this a lot, and we'll get your thoughts on this too. But the saddest part is, I think that they see themselves as very progressive, which is why I think it hurt Justin Trudeau so much when he got so much criticism from the left. Why he personally said that it hurt him more getting criticism from the left than the right was because of that. I think he does view himself as very progressive, even if he cops out. He's like, well, I'm the only one who's going to do that. But it's like that is the bare minimum. Like it's always just like under the bare minimum, and sometimes not even that.
And amazing that he prevented electoral reform because he was worried, I suppose, that he'd have to make deals with the NDP in order to stay in power. And now, a few years later, here we are with a deal with the NDP to stay in power.
Funny how that works out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, though, Bethany. That whole issue. I think that. Do you think that Trudeau is his worst enemy there with something like electoral reform? Like, can he be trusted to ever discuss it seriously again, or do you think it's completely dead meat?
I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
I don't see it happening. Maybe when they have a new leader and they're running again, and they need to make a promise that people would vote for them for.
Right.
They
Try
kept
it all
doing
again.
that with childcare, right?
Yeah.
Every couple election cycles, they'd whip it out as a promise, and 26 years later, we're finally getting it.
Took long enough, huh? And some partisans would suggest on the Liberal side of things that, when Jack Layton helped bring down the Martin government in 2005, that was killing childcare, and that was killing the Kelowna Accord, and which I think is just like, it's silly because the Liberals needed to be kicked out of power so badly by then. Like, I do think it was necessary that they needed to get the boot at that point. They'd gotten so corrupt. But partisans would say, well, why did the NDP bring down the government in 2005? But the Liberals, like that to me, that's just a partisan line. What do you guys think about that? Do you think there's any validity in that statement? Bethany first, and then Jacob can follow up.
Yeah, I think there's some validity in it. I don't know. I think with the whole deal that's been put forward, it's it has the potential to be really good, but I don't know, it does sort of have vibes of the the sort of deal that Jack and I forget who else was making the deal back then, but
Gilles Duceppe.
Yeah, it does have kind of those vibes, but thankfully this one actually ended up happening.
No prorogation.
Yeah.
Rather than making a comment, Liam, I'd actually like to switch gears a little bit in the time we have left.
Go for it.
So, and this is going to be completely out of left field, but so in South Korea, there's just an election. They moved from having a relatively left-leaning president to what has been described in the media as a Trump-like figure, and the swing demographic in that election was young men that were appealed in, it seems like basically misogynistic language. It shifted. It seems like I was reading like a 30-point shift for younger men in that demographic.
Holy moly!
And even here in Canada, we're seeing politics is becoming a lot more polarized on gender lines. Women are voting consistently now for the Liberals and NDP much more than for the Conservatives. And I think, like, as a man myself, I look in my social media feed and I understand why. Like, I open YouTube and all I'm seeing is Ben Shapiro. I'm seeing Jordan Peterson. I've had friends who they worked with me on a Liberal campaign that now they're tweeting out Pierre Poilievre tweets. Like, it's gone completely crazy. So I'm interested, with all your work getting women in politics, I'm interested in what you think progressive parties should do to combat a radicalization of young men. Should the focus for progressive politics, should it be getting these guys back? Or, now that we see this very misogynistic line developing, should it be instead trying to convert conservative women to the progressive causes? Because if you see people like Michelle Rempel getting screamed at the restaurant, like, or even people like Lisa Raitt, there are a lot of women in politics who I think I'm going to guess that they started it in conservative circles that aren't feeling as comfortable in those conservative circles. Should we be trying to reach out across the aisle to women, just double down on a female demographic, or should we try to stem a radicalization that seems to have gotten worse, especially the COVID pandemic, in under 30 males?
Yeah. Well, I think the issue of misogyny is a massive one, and it's not something that unfortunately the NDP can solve. I think that there's definitely things we can do to publicly, try to educate people to be firmly against misogyny within the party, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be seeing Jagmeet shilling any sort of cryptocurrency in the near future. I would be surprised. No NDP NFTs in the future.
And that's why they asked the other part, because what if I also don't think I think it would be a mistake to try and go after Liba and my demographic. To be honest, I think we should just let them hang out there. But what if do you think it's a good line for progressive parties to start selling, the Conservative Party is not a place for women, and start putting that line out there more and more, and trying to reach and they would have to involve, I think, some level of compromise to conservative women to get them on board. But I'm feeling a softening of that demographic that I've never seen before. There are particularly women of my generation that are working with the Tories that I've never had any daylight with politically, that I've found myself agreeing more and more. And it's not like I've changed my positions, that they suddenly were on the same page, because they're getting screamed at and yelled at in their constituency meetings like never before.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and I think that there are a number of progressive conservative women who don't see themselves represented in the Conservative Party, provincially or federally. So I do feel for them, but I don't know if necessarily their choice would be to switch to the NDP. I mean, maybe they're potential Liberal voters, but
can the party make a play for them if they want? That's more what
I think we have one of the reasons why we have so many women supporters is because our policies are so great, because we were pushing for policies that are so great for women and girls. So I think if we just continue with that, then I think that it's just sort of a natural attraction that happens, is if people actually look at the policies and they say, okay, this looks good, that's how I did it. So
I don't know. It's an interesting question and debate to have, and I think my hesitancy about it is that this, particularly in the West, is that the Liberal brand is so toxic outside of the cities. And I suppose the NDP are there now too, but they're more of a competing. Well, not really. They're competing for the next government, so I take that back. It's. So I wonder if the NDP would have an easier time than the Liberals in recruiting conservative women. The only trouble I see there is, depending on how partisan they are, that they might have difficulty accepting NDP or Liberal values. If they are conservative women, maybe they would rather just be politically homeless, than be a Liberal or NDP supporter. I know that there's a number of blue Liberals, a handful of blue Liberals, and a handful of red Tories that feel like that in their respective parties. So I don't know if it would be a situation of maybe a woman's super conservative in terms of being pro-choice and super conservative on LGBTQ rights, and but on this one issue, misogyny, because they're experiencing it personally, they realize that their party that they would normally vote for isn't for them.
Yeah, but I think leaving people politically homeless is a huge gamble, especially when we're talking about progressive politics.
Well, then that would require the Liberals or the NDP to shift a bit to the right, I think, to pick up some of those politically homeless people. That's what I feel like. I feel like it wouldn't be as easy to just poach them. Like you'd have to you have to poach them somehow. You have to give them, it's the carrot and the stick. You got to give them the carrot.
Yeah, I don't
do you
know.
think?
When I think of that, I think about Alberta, and I think that has definitely happened a lot. I think that the NDP has picked up a lot of female support that would have previously been voting for the PCs, and then UCP, and especially because I think Rachel is such a great leader. I think she has such appeal to everybody across the province, and I think as a woman, she has to work 50 times harder, and
sure.
has really shown that she's somebody to be respected. So I think that has definitely grown the party. And I mean, we even had, one of the PCs cross the floor to join the NDP. And, that it was kind of a crazy situation. It was like, you never really would have thought that would happen, but here we are, and it did happen. So.
Well, Rachel is definitely strategically one of the greatest leaders that I think Alberta has had. In my opinion, she reached some important milestones that no Alberta leader had ever even went. Like territory that nobody would ever go to before her. Like she was really a trailblazer in a lot of regards, especially for the progressive side of things in that province and the modernization of that province. It helped that there was some overlap with Naheed Nenshi, who I think has also been huge in trailblazing those values and making it acceptable to hold those values. But credit to Rachel where credit is due. I love having you on because these are the things I don't know. Like I had no idea that I don't know a lot about the NDP structurally as much as I do the Liberals, and I didn't know that they had poached a PC on the Alberta level. They had poached a PC MLA. Like that's remarkable. That's quite something.
Yeah, Sandra Jansen. She was a Calgary MLA, and she was in the cabinet. She was a cabinet minister for the PC government.
Wow, there you go. That's huge. And you know what? A similar situation happened. There's some really interesting dances between the PCs and NDPs and the NDP at the provincial level, and that happened here in Nova Scotia, where. So the NDP had a majority government term in Nova Scotia from 2009 to 2013. Daryl Dexter was his name. And he was a little bit give money to the old boys, so he got caught for that. And now the NDP's name is dirt in this province, like in Ontario, because the PCs and the Liberals can screw up multiple times, but the NDP can't. So they're now back down to like 5 to 7 seats, like a very small amount of seats. And But the irony was that in the last provincial election, August 2021, which Ian Rankin and the Liberals were expected to just walk away with, they were expected to just take the whole bag, and like Prentice in 2015, like I remember Jacob was telling me he was having champagne and everybody was enjoying themselves, and then disaster struck. And it was similar with this election. The PCs got a surprise majority. Tim Houston's the premier now, by in large part running to the left of the provincial Liberals, who in Nova Scotia were quite a lot like the Chrétien Liberals at the federal level, like very fiscally conservative and more socially centrist, like center-left, but more centrist, I'd say. And so the PCs ran to the left of that, promised billions in spending for healthcare, and a former NDP cabinet minister from the Daryl Dexter government endorsed the PC platform. So you're seeing these weird dances now, and I think the NDP has gotten some criticism from since Jagmeet took over at the federal level, because they don't do enough federally anymore to engage some of the workers. I think like the Liberals have kind of stolen that bag. I don't think that's entirely Jagmeet's fault. Like I think that started before him. But maybe there's an opportunity here strategically for the NDP to pull some of those worker conservatives back on side. I don't know how. Like again, it's like if the NDP has left-wing values and some workers that would vote NDP have right social values, but left values when it comes to like unions and pensions and benefits and things, and being in a supported job that pays you fairly for your time, it's possible that there could be a marriage there, because we keep seeing these dances, right? So it's interesting. I don't know. Like, do you see a possibility where at the provincial level that maybe some UCPers just have enough and maybe they're more to the left of what we would call the UCP and they jump to the NDP, or do you think they're just likely to split again? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think specifically for Alberta, I definitely think that, people who would have maybe held their nose and voted for a PC party or maybe the UCP now, they will be voting for the NDP because Jason Kenney has just been an absolute nightmare disaster. But something came to my mind when you were saying that, Liam. I've seen that exact situation when I was working on the campaign in St. Catharines, down in southern Ontario, and the riding goes back and forth between NDP and Conservative. And that might seem weird to some people, but once you actually get down there and you're actually talking to the supporters and you can like get a sense for the vibe and everything like that, you kind of like, oh, okay, so I see where this like sort of blue collar overlap, between the Conservatives and NDP is happening.
On that happy note, we'll probably have to wrap up the episode there. Well, thank you for coming in, Bethany. It was great to have this discussion, and probably we had such a great one, we might have to bring you on again if there's ever a time.
Thanks so much for listening along today. If you have thoughts on how to make the show better, if you know any good psychological thriller recommendations, or if you just want to send me love letters, hate mail, you can direct it to speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. That's speechfromthethrone@gmail.com.
And sign off from Ottawa.